Hello and welcome to another episode of I'm Still Playing. I know, it has been a fat minute since my last video. Unfortunately, real work has been piling up like crazy, so of course video production has slowed down a bit. But we're back at it today. We're doing a full recap of the story in Zenless Zero Update 2.2, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. Now, as always, if you haven't played through this story yet and you don't want to be spoiled, well, for heaven's sake, stop now, go back and play the story, and then come back and watch our recap. If, however, you're here, though, because you specifically skipped all those cutscenes, and now you want to have some clue as to what in the hell was going on, well, you've come to the right place. So let's get to it. All right, so to use my announcer voice for just a moment, previously on Zenless Zero, we left off with the Scooby Gang having revealed the collusion between Porciolimics, specifically one half of the leadership team, Ferox, and the Exaltus, with Porciolimics experimenting on porcelain purification and funding the Exaltus' own experiments. A miasma fiend the Exaltus created was eventually destroyed with the help of Yushuan, and Porciolimics was mostly disgraced, and the illegal lab and the factory were all shut down. So remember back at the beginning of 2.1 at the reception banquet hosted by Porciolimics, the one to kick off the investigation into the events of Limian Hollow? Well, we learned from Damien that the new Eridu Defense Force is just as interested in keeping the porcelain flowing as Porciolimics is in providing it, and that they've had sort of a sweetheart deal between the two of them for some time now. In fact, this is why Isolde is here as a representative from NEDF to make sure that their interests are looked after. Well, after the incident with Ferox, New Eridu Defense Force has decided to take matters into their own hands and to sort of, taken over Wi-Fi Peninsula, with Obel Squad there as the primary defense. The New Eridu Mayor, though, wants an inside person to keep an eye on NEDF, and he doesn't want to get his hands dirty, so of course he's called upon his favorite proxy to serve as envoy for the mayor. And that's the impetus for getting us thrown back into the fire. Now, some of the key themes to this entire story are notions of sort of loss and betrayal. And one of the main characters that we're asked to empathize with, in fact, I'd say the central character of the story, is an intelligent gun, strapped to the tail of a dragon Theron, imbued with the memories and personality of a fallen soldier of Obel Squad. Magus. Now, personally, I think it was a bit of a mistake to make the character we're most supposed to empathize with be a gun that's attached to another character's tail. I mean, there's just a certain, lack of relatability. But be that as it may, here we are. And so we start off with a dream, a memory of Magus from back before that last fateful mission when she was still human. And there's actually a scene here that I want to call attention to. Here you see a young Isolde pinging Magus with a toy Denny gun. One of those guns that shoots coins, or in this case, Denny's. I missed the importance of this originally, but it's a very cool moment because it's going to come full circle all the way at the end of the story. So after Orphea and Magus wake up, Magus is quick to assure Orphea that intelligent constructs do not dream, and she's just running some diagnostics. We, playing as Orphea and Magus that is, meet up with Isolde, and she tells us what the mission is and that it has two goals. The first is to enter Limian Hollow and to locate and pinpoint the Exalted stronghold. And the second is to meet up with the Mayor's Special Envoy, which, is us, Proxy. One of the things I liked about this story is that we jump right into the action. As soon as we're in the Hollow, we're duking it out with a squad of ethereals, fighting with a character that we've never played before in classic ZZZ story fashion. No worries though, ZZZ story missions lean heavily on the easy side, so on we go. Relatively quickly, we rendezvous with Belle, the envoy, and it's clear from the get-go that for whatever reason, Magus doesn't care one bit for Proxy. There's some back and forth, but the mission is updated, and we are immediately put up against a mini-boss with urgent calls for Aegis Squad to come help us out. Now we cut over to Aegis Squad and get our second chance to play a character that we've never played before, Seed. Unless, of course, you've already successfully pulled her, in which case I hate you, but let's not digress. Aegis Squad, consisting of Trigger and Seed, clear up the communication issues and join up with Blitz Squad, and they give us a super cool cutscene of Trigger dispatching enemies all sniper style, making us wish we really had actual sniper gameplay from Trigger. Oh well. After rejoining, we come across an Obscura, which is essentially a highly refined porcelain container for transporting etheric materials. In fact, it was an Obscura discovery that literally started the story quest for Update 2.1. Also, as you may or may not recall, at the end of the 2.1 story, we learned that over 300 Obscura were smuggled out of the previous porcelain factory before Ferox blew it up, and have been distributed to somewhere in Wi-Fi Peninsula. The two squads meet up, and Proxy is reintroduced to Seed, whom we met briefly in 2.1, though at the time we had no idea who she actually was. We just thought she was a mech. And yeah, no, I know, I'm not wading into that. So we're pursuing some Exaltus, and before we can go much further, a ton of actual mini-sacrifices climb out of the group of Obscura coffins. But before they can pose even a real threat, they're all dispatched by Obel Squad in one amazing cinematic.
Locking onto hostile targets. Aiden Spider. Good job. 3, 2, 1. Obel Squad. All enemies eliminated.
We capture the escaping Exaltus, but he's not much help, blathering on about how the ritual has already begun, or something like that. It's decided, though, that headquarters need to know about the sacrifice coffins, which could be spread all throughout Wayfire Peninsula, so we head back out of the hollow. Meanwhile, we get a behind-the-scenes conversation between Sarah and a devoted follower, saying everything is going according to plan, and hinting that the Defense Force may not be as noble as they claim. Back at the base, we let Isolde know about the Sacrifice Obscura coffins, and she's all, you know what, I got the Obscura, you just go and take out that Exaltus base. And after it comes to light that Magus has been dogging Proxy, Magus is forced to admit that Proxy was, well, actually kind of useful, although she still thinks Proxy is the dishonorable type. But more importantly, the head of NEDF's forces in Wayfire Peninsula, Major General Lorenz, has asked for a personal audience with the Proxy. Isolde warns Lorenz about the sacrifice coffins, and he pretty much just blows it off and tells Isolde to handle it. And then Lorenz seems to remember that the Proxy, exists, and he's all, why is an envoy from the mayor here? And we don't need no overseeing. But Isolde smooths it over with, well, with the envoy here, we're less likely to have the city council asking questions. And that does indeed placate the general. But then Lorenz drops the other shoe with literally cutting off all of Belle's external communications and movement, effectively placing her under house arrest at the base. So we leave the general's tent and we get a quick but foreshadowing conversation where Isolde alludes that working for the mayor has given her opportunity to investigate what really happened to hers and Magus squad the night the old capital fell. Proxy attempts to leave to go to Sabuon Temple but is blocked, showing that she really is under house arrest. And then to put a point on it, they attach a tracking device to her ankle, which is then pretty much completely forgotten about by the story. Of course, no 2-bit military communications blocking is going to keep us from accessing Fairy and Wise to the HDD, which we do so in short order. It turns out there are apparently several blind spots in Limian Hollow's most active areas, and Fairy is doing her best to try to calculate where they are. Belle sends over what she recorded in the hollows through her eye implants, and Fairy and Wise continue their deep dive into the missing locations. A little bit later in the night, we're awoken by a malfunctioning bamboo that was recovered from a mission into the hollows that's gone bad. A little hackery on our part, and we recover the bamboo's last recording, which shows an attack by miasma humans bearing old Defense Force uniforms, and an exalted priest gloating over the fact that the creator was able to resurrect dead soldiers through the miasma. We relay the findings to Isolde, who speculates that the only person who could have sent in troops without her knowledge would be the Major General himself. So we're then briefed on our next mission, which is to learn what we can about these miasma soldiers and to eliminate the Exaltus bases, which apparently we now have the locations of. Shortly after entering the hollow, we do indeed find an Exaltus base, but the Exaltus there have already fled, and in fact, what we find instead is another NEDF squad claiming to be under the orders of the General himself. Supposedly, the General sent them to support Obel Squad, but all they've done is claim to have captured the base themselves, and they let the Exaltus that were there flee. They're not all that keen on sharing what it is exactly that they're actually doing in the hollow to us, claiming to have other orders that keep them from pursuing the Exaltus. So, once again, it's time for Obel Squad to
Gear up and get ready.
Obel Squad heads back out, heading towards the heart of the base, and we soon come across the General himself, in the accompaniment of Lucro, the other half of the Porculimics head partners. They give no real explanation as to their presence in the base, and shortly take their leave. No, not suspicious at all. Meanwhile, we're treated to a short scene between Sarah and Mevarak again, whom, as you know, is not nearly as dead as we thought he was going to be. By the end of the story, we're going to know why he's not dead, and we'll get to that in a bit. But here we're assured, once again, that everything is still going according to plan, and that they actually intended to give up that base so Lorenz would think that they've won a victory. Back at the military base, it's all cheers and laughter at the supposed victory for capturing the Exaltus base. Lucro is there too, praising the General for them supposedly having recovered a large cache of Porculimics from the base. And apparently, Lorenz has ordered the evacuation of, well, all of Wayfire Peninsula because of the supposed extreme danger posed by the sacrifice coffins. While the troops celebrate their victory, Belle points out that this thing is not over yet. The Obscura still haven't been found, miasma activity in Limian Hollow is still on the rise, and the key Exaltus leaders are still at large. And notably absent is Isolde, who apparently has not been feeling well lately and has been missing a number of meetings in the last few days. Now, we're still under house arrest, but just because we can't leave doesn't mean other people can't come see us, and a short time later we get a visit from none other than Damien himself. You do remember Damien, right? He's the porcelain mid-tier manager who kind of ended up helping us take down Ferox. Well, he's here to tell us that Lucro is cleaning house at Porculimics, getting rid of anyone he thinks might be loyal to the old boss, and Damien fears that his head is on the chopping block next. But then it appears he's getting some help from an unusual source. And that is when we're introduced to Miss Zhao, a fluffy pink bunny Theron who's with the Krampus Compliance Authority, a sort of internal affairs office for TOPS. And this department is making sure that no one part of TOPS is overly screwing another part. and she's there to investigate Porcelumix, whom she says is clearly crossing over the line. We wrap that up and we're just about to head off to sleep when we're sort of kidnapped by the fellow members of Obel Squad and invited to a midnight raid of having illegal snacks, which is apparently what we do when Captain Magus is asleep. But it's also a time for sharing, and from Orphe we get a full lore dump of hers and Magus's background. It turns out that Orphe is in fact a clone of the fallen Magus and was created specifically to assist Magus. Magus's original body was destroyed, and her consciousness, her soul, was stored within the weapon. Now, why couldn't they put the consciousness inside of, I don't know, the clone itself? Well, because then you wouldn't have the crazy combination of a cute Thyran with a sentient gun attached to her tail, would you? Duh. In any event, it's here that we learn that Orphe pretty much lives her entire life in a crisis of self-confidence, always living in the shadow of the intelligent weapon that is always with her, but never believing that she can live up to its reputation. Shortly before going to bed, we use the HDD to contact Fairy and Wise to see if there's been any update on locating those blind spots on Limian Hollow. And apparently Fairy has, but because Obel Squad is now under orders to not do anything else, the base was captured after all, Belle figures that she's going to need to get some help from Sabuan Temple. So she asks Wise to get a message to Shifu for her. Of course, Wise may have exaggerated the urgency of the missive, because Belle has no sooner hung up the HDD when Shifu's spirit bird appears, and Belle is literally, magically teleported away back to Sabuan Temple, and is shortly having a conversation with, well, everyone at Yunkwai Summit. So we're catching up with everyone at the temple and having a few short but important conversations. We learn that Yeshuan has been having unsettling dreams of late and hearing whispers from the miasma. Foreshadow much? We also fill in Yishuan on the fact that Weifai Peninsula is peppered with porcelain coffins that could literally spout sacrifices. Yishuan has no sooner acknowledged that Yunkwai Summit may in fact need to get involved in this if NEDF isn't going to do anything, when the door to the temple is burst open and Noble Squad piles in, demanding their proxy back. After Belle helps to sort out the misunderstanding between the two groups, she explains, again, the real situation. Those blind spot coordinates are likely the location of the real Exaltus base. And then, on cue, Fairy beeps in to let us know that miasmic levels are exploding in Limian Hollow. Belle explains that the Exaltus can control miasmic levels, and so this is probably the Exaltus' fault. A new plan is formed. Go in, find the Exaltus, and wipe them out. Only one problem. Obel Squad is under orders to not go into the Hollows. Magus has an answer for this, though. Obel Squad was just pursuing the proxy, and she went into the Hollows. The next we find that all of Obel Squad has gathered in Valium Heights, including Colonel Isolde. And, well, she has a mission briefing for us. The evacuation of Valium Heights is about to begin. An Noble Squad is deployed as a mobile unit, free to move about the heights as needed. We also learn that Luco and Lorenz will be evacuating along with the other residents. Now, why would the general who's in charge of the entire operation be evacuating? That's a really good question. However, though, the fact that Obel Squad is mobile means that they're really free to sneak into the hollows as soon as they feel that the residents are safe. And that's exactly what we do a short time later. Before we appear in the hollows, though, we're treated to two, meanwhile, cutscenes. As the evacuation crowd gathers at the Valium Heights cable car, we get to overhear a conversation between Lucro and his subordinates as they load up porcelain in front of women and children trying to evacuate. Now, it just so happens Damien is nearby, and though he stops the Porcelumix lackeys from harassing the citizens, he also doesn't go so far as to ruffle any feathers by, actually allowing him to go first. It's a delicate line that Damien is threading. And then second, as General Lorenzo poses for a photo op overlooking Limian Hollow, we see Isolde stewing in the shadows, lamenting the way that those in power trample upon those beneath them, the civilians and the soldiers. She promises to Orpheus that this isn't over yet. Notice he doesn't say Orphe. In her head, she's talking to her fallen comrade, Orpheus herself, now Magus. All right, so now that we're in the hollow, we're dropped off in the base that we were in before, and Fury informs us that there's a fissure nearby that leads to the hidden locations that we couldn't find before. Our first step is to find that fissure. Along the way, Bill comments that the way that these data points lead out to the fissure, it kind of seems a little too well formed to be natural. As if somebody, set up a puzzle for us to solve. Someone indeed, right? Intentional or not, we solve the puzzle with the help of Eos and arrive at the fissure coordinates to find that same squad of Lorenz soldiers that we came across before. Supposedly, this location has a large cache of porcelain that Lorenz has ordered them to guard. Lorenz's guys ask what we're doing there, and though Belle is ready with the cover-up story, Magus comes clean with the whole entire real reason. The guard, of course, then threatens court-martial, tribunal, etc., but Magus is like, this is on me. and even promises to protect Proxy if need be. And so, we see that Magus has completed her arc from you must always follow orders all of the time to, sometimes you have to do the right thing. And just at that moment, Fairy interrupts with, guys, you're not going to believe this, but Isolde is contacting us via the HTD. Of course, Magus is expecting a dressing down from Isolde, right? But instead, Isolde is all like, no, you know what? You did fine, Magus. In fact, we shouldn't have followed orders either all those years ago at the fall of the old capital. And everyone is like, why are we talking about this now? Well, it appears that Isolde hasn't let go of the past, and her investigations have revealed what really happened back then. And it turns out, to absolutely no one's surprise, when her squad was supposed to be protecting a rail line evacuating citizens, it was in fact a rail line evacuating Porcelain. And the commander in charge received a hefty bribe from Porcelemics to guard that rail line. Magus, of course, is furious at hearing this, and for a little bit, Isolde and Magus are like winding each other up. But Belle steps in and says, hey, let's leave the past in the past and focus on the problem at hand. And in doing so, delivers a nice little speech about how much, we've all lost. Magus seems to get the message and calms down somewhat. And Isolde appears to have done so as well, but as you can suspect, she really hasn't. With that, we step to the issue and we are literally told it's time for combat. The combat starts off with a couple of mini sacrifices and a reminder that the Exaltists keep talking about a final sacrifice, and whatever that is, we need to stop it. We're then treated to a quick conversation with Sarah. It's the usual arch-villain commentary, right? That the final sacrifice is here, and she's not the real villains, it's the parasites in the city that really threaten New Eridu. And then, of course, she leaves us a nice little mini-boss for us to fight. Of course, she continues to blather on throughout the fight, but by now you're busy and you're not really listening to anything that she's saying, and fortunately it's not all that important. This is a pretty good fight, but when it's over, you find an Exaltus device that amplifies and controls the miasma in the area. Unfortunately, it's far too encased in miasma itself for us to be able to change it. Maybe Yishuan Shifu could help? Meanwhile, back in Valium Heights, the Exaltus have finally decided it's time to release the sacrifices from those Obscura coffins. But many sacrifices are no match for Sabuon Temple, and Shifu and the other disciples show up to help. Back in the Hollow, we get the message, and we have to decide, are we going to return to the city to assist or continue on? Well, to assist in that decision, we learn that there is a key area along the mountain road where there aren't many defenses, ostensibly because the maps the Obel Squad were given didn't show any Obscura in the area. Those people need our help. So, off we go. So we end up back at the base camp and we get the recap. The disciples of Yongquai Summit have secured the main city, but we need to protect 2 VIP targets that were along the mountain road. Yeah, that's right. None other than Lucro and General Lorenz himself. So, off we go. We start off by clearing out some materials along the path, but we encounter a frightened Porcelemics employee that says, they're all dead. They weren't ethereals. The deadly ghosts got them. And at that moment, Isolde herself contacts us to tell us that the blood debt for their fallen comrades so many years ago that was half owed by the corporation and half owed by the military, well, she's just made the corporation pay its half. She's killed Lucro and everyone else that was with him. I mean, after all, they've benefited from his actions, right? So they weren't innocent either. And Belle and the entirety of Obel Squad are like, wait, you did what? But then Isolde reveals that Lorenz was the commander that benefited. And Magus is, of course, furious and is like, okay, fine. Isolde is right. This is just between her and me. And Trigger, I gotta say, I love Trigger. Trigger is quick to remind Magus that she's not frickin' alone out here, that they all bear the same scars. And those scars are the reason they joined Obel Squad to begin with. And Seed and Orphe get in on the action too, reminding Magus that they're all out there together. Belle brings them back to reality, and Magus agrees, yeah, the mission must continue. One more time, it's time for Obel Squad to
Gear up and get ready.
As the squad sets out, they encounter more Obscura spewing sacrifices, and it's clear that these Obscura were omitted from Colonel Isolde's intel. A bit further in, and we encounter the remains of Isolde's blood debt payment, the body of Lucro himself and some of his lackeys. I don't know, for me it seemed a bit of an ignoble end for Lucro to die off-camera, but then again, most of his villainy occurred off-camera as well, so I don't know, I guess maybe it's justice. Just beyond the bodies of Lucro and friends, we encounter our man Dante, who we helped back in Celium Bay in the 2.1 story. Dante got caught up in the road when the sacrifices appeared, and in short order we arranged for him to be escorted home and back to safety. But not, however, before we get some kid wisdom, as Magus takes the opportunity to literally interrogate the kid, asking if he could get back at the people that killed his uncle, who was also a soldier, would he? And the kid's like, no. He wouldn't bring his uncle back, and his uncle died doing what he loved, protecting people. So yeah, take that, Magus. Listen to the kid already. At last we catch up to General Lorenz, and Orphe and the rest of the Obel Squad are all pleading with Magus to not do anything reckless. Of course, Lorenz denies the accusations, and in fact puts the blame back on Magus and their squad's supposed incompetence. And then straight up threatens Obel Squad. Magus seems ready to burst, but in the end decides not to pull the trigger. Lorenz heads towards the boat, confident in his escape, but guess who's waiting for him on the boat? Yep, that's right, Isolde. And before anyone can do anything, she plugs Lorenz right in the chest and makes her escape on the boat, fleeing into Limian Hollow. So long, General Lorenz, and curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, Isolde. So yeah, by now everyone's kind of reeling from the shock of Isolde's betrayal. But before we can do too much about it, Fairy interrupts to warn us that, hey, the miasma levels in Limian Square are skyrocketing. The Exaltus haven't gone anywhere, and while we've been dealing with Lucro and Lorenz, their final sacrifice has been going forward. Things are moving towards the end now, and Yishuan Shifu promises the aid of Young Kwai Summit to Obo Squad to face whatever awaits them in Limian Hollow. In the Hollow, we're confronted with the final Exaltus base, and dire warnings from Fairy about the ether activity levels. And so, with yet another Obo Squad,
Gear up and prepare to move out.
final battle begins. As we make our way through the base, we spot Sarah a few times fleeing deeper into the base, and as we make pursuit, we finally catch up with her, only for her to make more villainous comments about how the Overseer is only one step away, and then she goes to flee into a nearby fissure. Again. Yeshuan says, leave her to me, and takes off after her through the fissure. The rest of us, we head to the heart of the miasma, and theoretically to Isolde. Along the way, we encounter some of the undead miasma soldiers that we heard of, but Yishuan is quick to note that these are just illusions created by the miasma. In short order, we find Mevarok waiting for us, and Mevarok removes her mask to reveal that, yes, it's Isolde herself. Isolde took the place of Mevarok when we killed him earlier, and now everything comes to light. Isolde has been orchestrating all of the events so far, including the blind spots in the Defense Force's intel, the Obscura attack on Wayfi Peninsula, everything. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say, this illustration is absolutely frickin' S tier. Just so good. A little bit further into the base, and the final boss fight is on. Isolde / Mevarok and hundreds of miasma soldiers against Obo Squad and Young Kwai Summit. Isolde plunges her blade into her own chest to serve as the catalyst for her ultimate miasmic transformation, and the battle is on. Isolde Mevarok is a pretty good fight, but when we get down close, Magus and Yishuan work together to blast her into oblivion, destroying all of the miasma soldiers at the same time. But Isolde herself still remains, though miasma has fled her, and she no longer feels its strength. And with a camera angle that is most definitely intentional, Magus says, leave the rest to her, and Orphe reminds her, you mean us. So we get a nice little exchange between Magus and Orphe as they approach Isolde, and then we get down to business in Phase 2 of the boss fight, with just Orphe against Isolde herself. Now, for me, I felt like this one was harder than Phase 2, but mostly it's because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing with Orphe and Magus. But the devs did do something smart here. Instead of just making you straight up unkillable, as Wildering Waves does with their story boss fights, if, or when, in my case, you're reduced to 0 hit points, you get a story segment on perseverance and resilience, and your hit points are restored and allowed to battle on. I don't know, for me, it just felt a little bit like a better handling of, we want you to keep fighting mechanic than just never allowing your hit points to drop to 0. In any event, I'm proud to say that I only needed a single plot armor resurrection to finish Isolde off, and here we finally come full circle to that scene we saw at the beginning. Though Orphe and Magus still want Isolde to find redemption, she's having none of it, and she draws her gun and fires, forcing Magus to throw her knife into her chest. Only, we come to discover, the gun was her Dinny gun. She never intended to hurt Orphe. But instead, she sacrificed herself on Magus's blade. It's a great moment, and I actually love the way that they brought this full circle. We get a final, touching animatic, allowing Isolde to earn her redemption, or at least to ask for forgiveness, before she shatters into a miasmic residue. But we're not quite done yet, because the miasma suddenly coalesces into the form of Carol Arna, Belle and Wise's teacher that they've been searching for clues for all along. Carol speaks to Belle, but it's unclear if she's talking to us now or we're hearing her voice from the past. But then she mentions the Creator, and it's implied that she's either working with or at least involved in some way with the Exaltus. We learn that there was something in Hollow Zero that both Carol wanted and the Exaltus wanted, and she was willing to pave the way for them to get it if it meant she could achieve her goal as well, regardless of the cost. It's one hell of a lore dump for us, because it's the first time that Carol has actually been associated with the Exaltus, in some way at least. Back at the ranch, or more to the point, Young Kwai Summit, we get a reunion with Obo Squad, and everyone sorts out their feelings. And we learn that Obo Squad will not face any court-martials. So this appears to be the end of the story, but there still remains one more post-credit scene. One final animatic with Yeshuan and Sarah, whom you remember took off after her when we split up. Yeshuan and her are actually having a fairly casual conversation, and Sarah is clearly receiving the seal of the Overseer. She's going to be the next leader of the Exaltus. More alarmingly, we see Yeshuan buying into the Creator's promises, and Sarah promises him so much more. And now that really is a wrap on the 2.2 story. As for myself, I'm a little bit of mixed feelings about the story. I thought the Isolde betrayal was, a nice twist, but honestly, I'm a bit done with the Exaltus and Porcelimics as a villain group. I mean, it feels like these last several stories have all had a bit of sameness, Forces supposedly working for good, working secretly with the Exaltus, eventually getting corrupted by the miasma, transforming into a giant miasma boss that we have to go and fight. I get it. The hollows and the zones and the ethereals will always play a major role in any ZZZ story. But come on, isn't it time for something that feels a little bit different? I will say I did rather enjoy the Mockingbird saga. That felt different, so at least there's that. In any event, what did you think of the 2.2 story? Are you ready to finally learn the truth about Carolina? Ready to square off against Overseer Sarah? Because we're going to have to eventually. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. I think I'm going to do a Seed companion story recap next, and then, I don't know, maybe back to Wuthering Waves for a bit. Until then, whatever you play, play hard. And cheers.